Hello and welcome to part 6 of the Great Depression and the New Deal, and now we're going to talk about the bonus army. By 1932, Herbert Hoover was in a real embattled presidency, and it was made worse by the fact that the Democrats were running a strong candidate in the now reinvented Franklin Delano Roosevelt, having recovered from polio. All right, so the final nail in Hoover's coffin was the bonus army march. In 1932, May of 1932, a group of World War I veterans created a little shanty town across from the Capitol building in a place called Anacostia Flats, right? A Hooverville, if you will. Okay. In total, it grew to a size of about 20,000 people. That was World War I veterans. It was their families, wives, children, parents, grandparents, et cetera, right? So you have this little town that is developed across the bridge from the Capitol and from the White House at Anacostia Flats. During the day, these World War I vets were protesting out in front of the Capitol building in the White House. What they were asking for was the payment of a bonus. World War I vets had been promised to be paid a bonus that would be delivered to them in 1945, right? A check. Thank you for your service in World War I. Why 1945? Well, honestly, that gives you enough time for a certain percentage of them to have died of old age and things like that. It's almost like a retirement check for those that remain. What these soldiers are saying here in these protests in 1932 is we don't want the full amount, but we need help. We need something. So please, whatever you can give us, cut us a check for that, and we'll call it all good. You can forget about the 1945 bonus, right? That's what they were protesting for. All right. Now, the head of the army was a man by the name of General Douglas Macarthur. Douglas Macarthur was convinced that no good American soldier would ever do something like this, and this was clearly the act of a communist infiltration, right? That communists were behind this. And so he actually sent members from his G2, from his intelligence gathering arm of the Army, into Anacostia Flats to kind of get a feel for what kind of communist influences were going on in there. They came back and told General Macarthur that of the 26 leaders of the movement, only 3 of them had any communist leanings whatsoever, and none of them were actually communists at all, right? That he was wrong. He elected just to ignore his intelligence advice on this, right? Hoover, though, for him, this is a huge political embarrassment in an election year, right? He can't just let this keep going on. Now, on June 15th, the House is going to pass what was called the Patman Veterans Bill, which allocated $2.4 billion, which would basically give each one of these veterans a check for about $1,000, right? Which is what they were asking for. Now, Hoover himself said that he would veto this bill. He says, if this bill hits my desk, I'm going to have to veto it. We don't have that money to pay him, right? But he didn't have to worry about it because it's going to die in the Senate on June 17th anyways, right? So finally, by July, Hoover decides he needs to get these guys out from in front of the White House, out from in front of the Capitol building, right? It's, we're getting closer and closer to election time, and this is an embarrassment. The newsreels and the newspapers are showing pictures and news footage of this every day, right? So on July 21st, he orders Douglas Macarthur to remove the protesters from in front of the White House and the Capitol building and get these veterans back to their Hooverville and Anacostia Flats, but not to cross over into Anacostia Flats, right? Now, Douglas Macarthur has a tendency to do what Douglas Macarthur wants, and we're going to talk about him again. He's not, quite frankly, he's not my favorite American personality, okay? He decided that he would take this order as an opportunity to rid himself of this entire Hooverville that he believed was actually just a communist infiltration. He is going to lead the army himself. Now, remember, this guy is the head of the U.S. Army, so that means he doesn't have people to do this. His people have people to do this. Later, Douglas MacArthur's aide-de-camp, Dwight David Eisenhower, captain at this time, was interviewed by Stephen Ambrose during the making of his biography, and asked him, said, well, what do you think about MacArthur going down there and leading the troops there at Anacostia Flats during the bonus march? And Eisenhower told Stephen Ambrose, he said, I told that dumb son of a bitch not to go down there. All right. So MacArthur's down there. He begins moving the troops away, or moving the veterans away from the White House and from the Capitol building. He's using tanks. There's a young captain named George S. Patton who's helping with this. He's using tear gas. I mean, let's put this in perspective for a minute. He's using tear gas on World War I veterans that were in the trenches in France. Okay. He's pushing them towards the bridge across to Anacostia Flats. The Secretary of the War is a man by the name of Patrick J. Hurley. He becomes concerned that MacArthur's going to supersede his orders, that he's going to cross over and destroy the Hooverville, the shantytown. So he sends a messenger to MacArthur saying, under no uncertain terms are you to cross over into Anacostia Flats. Gets no response. So he sends a second messenger with the same order. Do not cross over. Okay. MacArthur elects to ignore both of these orders. As he tells Eisenhower, he says, I do not have time to be bothered by people coming down pretending to bring orders. So he's made the willful choice to ignore these orders that are coming from the Secretary of War. Now, when you look at this, he's disobeying the orders from the only two people in his chain of command that are higher above him. His troops will cross over into Anacostia Flats. They will chase them out of the 20,000 residents out there. They'll burn the Hooverville to the ground. And all of this, of course, gets caught in the news reel cameras. And so you have footage like this. You see you got the burning Veterans Village here. And in the background, you have the dome of the Capitol building. There's nothing more politically damaging to Herbert Hoover. And, of course, who gets the blame for all this? Not Douglas MacArthur. Herbert Hoover. Hoover's blamed for all this. Honestly, this probably should have been the end of Douglas MacArthur's career, but like I said, we are going to talk about him later. One report even goes that a U.S. senator had sent a telegram to Herbert Hoover and said, in this upcoming election, would you please vote for Franklin Roosevelt so that it'll be unanimous? Well, the election doesn't actually work out that way, but the bonus army certainly did mark the end of any possibility of Herbert Hoover winning the 1932 presidential election.